And I think there are all sorts of people out there that are deeply passionate about this. They're polarized from their family members and their neighbors and their fellow congregates and other Christians, and they don't know why that they are so emotional and so passionate about this. This book is an attempt to help them understand why. There's a reason why. There's a logical, sociological, historical reason why we think of our country the way that we do. And I think this book can help us understand that. And I think having that knowledge can allow us to get to a place where we can begin to untangle our love for our country and our allegiance to God. And when we do that, I think when we have proper perspective, we can have much healthier conversations with what's happening in our world and in our country right now.
Hey, welcome back, faithful politics listeners and watchers. I'm your political host, Will Wright, and I'm joined, as always, by your faithful host, Pastor Josh Bertram. What's going on, Josh?
Doing just fine. Thanks, Will.
Hey, and today we have with us Wes Crawford. He is a vice provost and associate professor of church history at Abilene Christian University. His research focuses on American religion, race, and the history of churches of Christ. He's the author of Shattering the Illusion and Courage in the Sheer Silence, and his forthcoming book, One Nation Over God, which is right here for our YouTube watchers, which examines American civil religion. And Wes also has served 20 years as a preaching minister and continues to preach at congregations around the country. So welcome to Faithful Politics, Wes.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to start off the interview by asking you a question that I've asked almost every single one of our guests, because everybody chooses sort of their profession for their own reasons, and it seems like studying, I don't know, like American Christianity is a very like niche topic.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to have like a lot of usefulness in today's sort of like pop culture, politics or whatever. So like what made you want to like become a professor of American Christianity?
Yeah. I think you may have described it well, usefulness. I remember going through seminary years ago, preparing to become a minister in a church. And as you mentioned, I've done that for most of my adult life, 20 years preaching as a pastor in a church, all the while teaching. So I've had one foot in the academy and one foot in the church for my whole adult life, and really kind of set out on this journey with American religion early in that process because I saw the incredible applicability of these things. I think they're incredibly relevant. One of my favorite things to do, even while preaching in a church, or to teach classes on this to folks in the congregation, because I think we all have these feelings about politics and our nation. We're so passionate about these things. We have an emotional response, but we don't really understand why. Most of us don't understand why. And so this topic that I've written on is something that I remember studying in seminary many, many years ago, close to 30 years ago now. And when I first encountered this, it was just like a light bulb went off. And suddenly I was able to connect so many dots and understanding why we are the way we are. And I feel like church history generally is like that. As one that's been a leader in the church for a long time, I think understanding our past helps us understand better why we're doing the things we're doing. And I think that is no more true than studying American religion. And there are some reasons specifically for Americans that we are passionate about our religion. There's a reason that we have a hard time separating our religion from our politics, from our love for our country. Those things are uniquely American. And the academic side of this and studying this for a number of years helped me understand that. And so I have a passion for helping other people understand it, helping students understand it in the classroom, talking about this at various churches, integrating this into sermons and teaching Bible classes on this at church has just become a passion for mine over my entire adult life.
I really love that. Sorry, go ahead, Will.
No. Go ahead, Josh.
No, I mean, I really love that. And I love it reminds me a little bit of my story, right? I resonate with the just desire to teach people truth, not only in the Bible, but also in civil life and in secular life, for lack of a better term. And I've always kind of been passionate about that. Like, I want people to know the truth. I mean, that's part of why I even wanted to do this podcast to talk about politics so much. I'm like, what is wrong with me? But I think part of it is that I wanted people to understand that the Christianity appeals and can apply in every area of these lives, if not in specific passage or section, right? Mapping on, at least in values, at least in attitude, at least in the way that we treat people, in the way that we treat other humans. And we haven't done a great job of that throughout the years. And Christians, I'm talking about as a general group, right? Obviously, very big, broad generalization there. But one thing that I hear a lot about is civil religion. And when I hear about civil religion, some people might hear civil religion and they think, oh, is it civil versus uncivil religion? Is it like some people are civilized and nice in their religion and other people are just very uncivil in their religion? That's not what we're talking about here, though. And I think that's a term that gets very confused, and it's one that you've done work on. Would you help us understand and our audience understand what are we talking about when we talk about civil religion, and why is that important, and how is it different than, I don't know, personal regular religion? Is there a difference? What's going on?
Yeah, the school of thought came first from a sociologist, historian named Robert Bellah, who lived the 20th century. He wrote an essay, which is based upon a series of lectures that he presented called Civil Religion in America. And he was the first to really describe this phenomenon that I try to write about in the book. Let me say first, the book is an attempt to take a lot of these things that I've been studying for the better part of my adult life and teaching this in the classroom and in graduate school. It was the recognition, though, that so many of these things have not filtered into the church. And I think they need to be understood in the church. And so I've tried to take what Robert Bellah wrote about, more than half a century ago, and try to make it applicable to a general audience in the church. So you've read the book and you understand it's really aimed at just anybody. You don't need a degree in this stuff to understand it. I've told people it reads more like a sermon than it does an academic book, and that was intentional. But what he talked about with civil religion is really, it's an interesting concept, and it's the thing that connected the dots for me more than anything else. And you have to understand a little bit about where America came from. So when America was born, thinking about the Revolutionary period, the founders were together. They had to decide, among many other things, what are we going to do with religion? Every other civilization in the history of the world had an established religion, meaning that everybody that was a part of that civilization had that in common. And so if you were, for example, if archaeologists will tell us, if they unearth these archaeology sites and they begin to dig around, one of the things that they find in these ancient civilizations is that the temple, or what we would call the church building or whatever else, the religious center was literally in the center of the community, and everything else was built around that. So you have the religious center, the temple in the middle, and then you may have the marketplace built. Think of concentric circles, and then residential areas were beyond that. But religion was at the center of things. It was the thing that united the whole civilization together. Though they may be different in many other ways, certainly gender, occupation, and generationally, they have all this diversity, but they had religion in common. It bound them together. And so fast forward to the American period, we were the first civilization, as we know it, that did not have an established religion. So when the founders got together, they really honestly had no other choice at that point, because if you think of colonial America, there was already a rich religious diversity in the colonies, more than the world had ever seen. And so by the time they were putting together the Constitution and framing our nation and setting our laws in place, they really had no other choice but to grant full religious liberty, which again was a novelty at that time. It had never been done before. But, the proverbial cat was already out of the bag. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. I mean, there was already so much diversity, they really had no other choice. But that had serious implications for America. And so for the first time, here was a civilization that did not have religion to unite them. And that has dramatic implications for a people. We need something to hold us together, Religion had served that function in every other society. So what do we do? What do we do as Americans? How are we going to be a one people? And so over time, our love for our country began to look a lot like a religion, as in other civilizations. And one way to think about this, I remember studying this years ago, and we talked about religions generally and the things that define enduring religions. So there are some religions that stand the test of time. Christianity, Islam, Judaism, they've been around for millennia. And there are some religions that come and go. They're very interesting, a flash in the pan, they're exciting to study, but they were gone within 100 years or so. So what is it that these enduring religions have in common? And so when we study that, there are certain things that rise to the top. So for example, enduring religions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, they have a sacred book. They have sacred rituals. They have a sacred calendar. They have sacred people. All of these things have really cohered the religion together and give it shape. And all of these enduring religions have that. What we've noticed is that in America, for the first time, we began to attach those attributes to our love for our country. And so, for example, we have a sacred text in the Constitution. And you say, well, it's an important text, but I don't know if I would call it sacred. But I want you to think about I would call religious discussions that we've had around the Constitution, even within the last decade. I think of the ways in which congressmen and women in Washington, they exegete this text every day. They're parsing and pulling it apart and trying to determine what this single word or that phrase means. And the implications of their conclusions are really, really important for us. I mean, we take great stock in those things. And when you think about rituals, for example, one of the things that comes to mind is the firestorm that centered around Colin Kaepernick just a few years ago. So remember, here's this NFL football player that refuses to stand during the playing of the national anthem, which had been customary. It was the ritual before NFL games. And instead of standing, he took a knee. And I remember I was a pastor at that time, just seeing the almost outsized rage that happened. And I talked to people in my church, and they were so upset about this. I understand maybe being upset and not agreeing, but it was really emotional for a lot of people. And I think the reason is because a kind of a sacred boundary had been breached. This was a sacred, time-honored ritual that he refused to participate in, and it had political implications, but I think you could say it had religious implications. People were passionate about this. And the same is true for, religious symbols. If you think about the Bible is our religious symbol, but think about the symbols that we have for America, the American flag. And think, again, the firestorm that's created with the debate around burning the flag. And in our lifetimes, we've seen the emotion that comes with that kind of discussion. And so civil religion generally is talking about that. It's about the ways in which we've attached religious significance to these pieces of our love for country. And this was a new thing. This was a kind of a first of its kind that happened in America. And it's been the thing that has united us. People like Emil Durkheim, philosopher from generations ago, talks about religion this way. One of the functions of religion, among many other functions, is that it provides coherence. It brings people together. And so lacking an established traditional religion to hold us together in Americans, we've had this to hold us together. And it's taken on the qualities of a traditional religion in ways that probably no one expected. This was the first of its kind. And I think that's one of the reasons we have such difficulty pulling our politics away from our religion and our love of country away from our faith, because they've become so ingrained and so central to who we are as American people. This is the thing that unites us in ways that nothing else has. So that's a general, very quick description of civil religion.
I love that. And in your book, I'm gonna kind of stay here for a second, because in your book you also talked about kind of like the role of the faith leader or the pastor in the colonial days kind of compared to where we are today, right? So like in the colonial days, state church, like your taxpayer funds are going to the state church. And I think in your book, you talk about, like where a person went to church was more like a product of their of like their geography. Essentially, right. like your pastor will be there, because he's in your neighborhood, and it'll be the person that will bury you, and so on and so forth. So talk to us a little bit more about that, and kind of like,
sure.
What changed when states started to, or colonies started to disestablish.
Yeah. So think of Europe, for example, in the 16th century or the 15th century, right at that time of the Protestant Reformation. This is the era of John Calvin and Martin Luther and radical religious revolution taking place across Europe. So how did one determine whether or not they were going to be a Catholic or a Protestant? So if you lived in England, for example, how did you determine whether or not you were going to be a Catholic or a Protestant? Well, it wasn't up to you. It was up to the monarch. So if the king happened to lean Protestant, well, then you leaned Protestant. It was ingrained in the laws. It was in the rituals of the civilization. If somebody came along like, Queen Mary, who was a Catholic, well, then suddenly you were Catholic again. And it really wasn't up to you. By virtue of your citizenry in a specific place, that determined your religious practice. There was really no choice. That's the way religion had functioned. These established religions had always functioned in the history of civilization. But in America, and even before America became America, you think about the colonial days, there was something different. And so, for example, as someone moved to what became Pennsylvania was filled with incredible religious diversity, even before the American Revolution. You had people that were Quakers. You had Baptists, you had atheists, you had Jews, you had people all over the map, and they were there, all of them, citizens of this civilization, this what eventually became the state of Pennsylvania. And if you move down the East Coast there, think of Georgia, strong evangelical area. Maryland for a long time was a strong Catholic area. Up in what is now the New England area, strong for Congregationalists. But all of these people were members of the same society, practicing religion in very different ways. And we take that for granted because we've never lived in a time where religious liberty wasn't a reality. But in that time, this was completely new. And so that wasn't uniting them as religion had done in the past. They had the ability to choose. But if you had lived in any other civilization before, that choice was not given to you. It was decided for you. So religious liberty is a wonderful thing, right? I mean, I'm so glad and thankful that we live in a place where we can choose how we practice our faith. And there are implications of that. One of the implications is that we do not have this mode of coherence as other civilizations have had in the past. Yeah,
that coherence, it's like it's a double-edged sword, and obviously it's going to create some energy and some unity and some cultural unity, which I know civilizations need some cultural unity to hold them together. And yet, of course, the double-edged sword, though, is that you don't have the individual freedom. You don't have the sense of your own destiny, your own ability to choose, which is about as American, I think, as you can get, at least in a way that we think of it today, is our ability to choose, And I'm still stuck on this thing. I'd love to get a little bit more insight from you and your research on why American patriotism is experienced with such religious intensity. What is going on? And I guess what I'm getting at is it the transcendence? You said there's sacred texts, rituals, saints, and yet I could look at this, like you said, you hear sacred text. I'm like, I never thought of the Constitution in the same way as I thought of the Bible. As a Christian, although now I see that very clearly, what you're saying. I'm kind of talking like when I was first introduced to the Constitution, first thinking about it, I never thought about it in terms of religion at all, or civil religion at all. I didn't think it in terms of, first time I saw it actually was in this little pamphlet from the Heritage Foundation, actually, that called it a a sacred, secular sacred text. That's what they call the Constitution. Right. I was like, what? Right. Sacred text? So that's my first introduction to that thinking. But why is it the transcendence of the country? Is it the country represents God, or God blesses the country? Why is this so appealing to people?
I think there's multi layers there. I think one of the issues is, as I've said, over time, our love for our country has functioned like a religion. We're religious people. We understand this. I think we would agree. I think God created us to need community in some way. We were not made to be isolated from other people on a desert island. We need each other. And I think that is part of the human community. That's the way we were created. So we crave that just innately. We need that connection. And religion, again, among many of its other functions, proximity to God being chief among those, religion has functioned as a uniter. It has brought people together. It has cohered society together. And because we haven't had that through traditional religion in America, we have inadvertently, I think, and it's just happened haphazardly, we have begun to attach those things that have traditionally been assigned to religion. We've assigned those things to our love of country. And it's difficult to know exactly how it happened, but we recognize it when we see it, right? And so one of the things I noticed, I tell this story in the book, I remember preaching years ago for a church in Texas, and it was the habit of this congregation, as I think it is in many Protestant, especially largely evangelical churches across the American South, on those Sundays closest to Veterans Day, or those Sundays closest to Memorial Day, there's some sort of a recognition of the special day. And so I remember
the sacrifice people have made.
Right. And we connect it, right? We connect it to Jesus. The sacrifice is this close connection. And so I remember preaching it was November, closest to the Sunday on Veterans Day. And it was one of those years I hadn't been out of seminary very long. I've been studying the stuff we're talking about today. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, I'm not going to do that this year. I'm just going to move along. And I want to help people see that there's no connection. I mean, there's church and there's state, and these two, they may both be important, but they don't belong in the same room.
That's funny.
Yeah, it was a bad idea. And so I remember that Sunday I got up and I preached, no mention of veterans, did not have the veterans stand, which had been the tradition in our congregation, and instructed the people that were also a part of worship that day, don't mention it. If you want to say, hey, great holiday weekend, this is great, but we're not going to mention sacrifice. We're not going to mention veterans. Just move on, going right through the sermon series as normal. Man, I'd finished that sermon. I'd been done about 10 seconds. I'm walking down the podium area there, and this elderly gentleman met me, and he was 3 inches from my nose. And it took him a minute to get the words out. And then I'll never forget. I was early 20s, and his finger was up in my face, and he said, "How dare you?" And he had tears, welling in his eyes. He said, "How dare you?" And then he asked me, I couldn't say anything. I was just, numb at that moment. And he said, "Are you a veteran?" And I said, "No, sir." And he said, "Well, I could tell." And he turned around and he walked out. That was one of those moments. I can't tell you why that happened necessarily, but I know it when I see it. For him, that day was sacred.
Yes.
It wasn't just a special holiday. It was sacred. For him and the Constitution, it's not just an important document. It is a sacred document, and we must get it right. The way that we talk about the way politicians interpret, or the Supreme Court interprets the Constitution, these are not normal political discussions. These are religious discussions in the minds of many Americans. We attach that weight to them because I think that has been so central to our identity as Americans, in the same way that Christianity or Judaism or something else have been central to the identity of people living in other societies. That has been the thing, amidst all of our other diversity, that is the thing that we have held in common. And over time, that has been the thing that has provided coherence to our society. And it has over time become to us a religion in every sense of that term.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think what I want to push on a little bit is thinking about even more the idea of sacred and is it bad?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I guess like I'm looking at the guy and thinking about the old man who's pointing. I got two, I had grandfathers in World War II, and I cried when I heard the, Star Spangled Banner, chills down my spine, say the Pledge of Allegiance with pride. I'm a little bit less just because of how, not that I don't love our country, I love our country. I just know I'm more realistic about how Christians have acted, how this country has acted. I don't paint it with a pink rose-colored glasses like I used to, because that's just not true. It's not reality. But I love this country. And I'm thinking about that guy, and I'm thinking about my grandpa who served, people who died that he knew. And Will has served, and he's been into war for this country. And so I think about that, and I think about Will could have died and suffered physically for this country. And I'm wondering, like, maybe sacred isn't the right word, because I guess, like, you think about, like, because it's not as if Christians are, like, they're still Christians. They're still looking at God, like God is sacred, God is transcendent, God is stuff, but we're also adding country. And then it's like the transcendence almost like fights each other sometimes because the transcendence of the country is so imminent. It's here all around us, and we're told every day in a million ways why we're supposed to be patriotic, or we're supposed to be good spenders, consumers, doing whatever it is, it's for the country, right? I guess I don't even know if I have a question as much as just a tension to wrestle through. Of that
I think that's a good way to put it.
Was he wrong in saying that, or was he misguided, or what was it as you reflect?
So I think you name it well. What I would say is this: that transcendence that you're talking about, the transcendence, for example, of Christianity, of our faith in God. And I think I'll just say at a base level, there's an issue when we have difficulty describing America in a non-transcendent way. Because America has reached that level of transcendence in many of our minds. And I would say ultimately, I think that's a problem. I think that's a problem. When we can't separate those two things, that's a real issue. As we know, as people of faith, the Bible has a lot to say about idolatry.
Yes, it does.
And I think that's what we're talking about. And so in our own time, the way I see this play out practically in our world, and I know you've seen this as well, are Christian people who oftentimes will set aside their religious convictions in the name of politics or political candidate or political party or something else. It's evident, though most of us would probably never say this out loud, and we may not even realize it's true about ourselves, is that if we have to choose between allegiance to God and allegiance to whatever that is, political party, nation, political candidate, whatever else, practically speaking, many of us in our time, many Christian people living in America are choosing America. They're choosing that allegiance, practically speaking, and we're setting aside sometimes our time-honored, the ethics of Jesus, things that we would never have set aside in the past, but because of a political candidate or a political party or whatever else, we're willing to do that. And I think that's just evidence of the degree to which our allegiance to country oftentimes supersedes our religion, our allegiance to God. I tell this story in the book, and this is probably in my lifetime, this is where it hit home for me more than anything else. My mother lived in Branson, Missouri for many, many years. In fact, we just moved her away from Branson, Missouri. And before that, my grandparents had a place in Branson, Missouri. So I've been going to Branson since I was elementary school, young kid. So I know the Branson culture very, very well. And if you've been to Branson, perhaps I don't even need to explain that anymore. But it's a very unique culture. And I've told people before the phrase that we use, God and country. If you look up God and country, the phrase in the dictionary, there's a picture of Branson, Missouri. I mean, it is the poster child, the definition of God and country civilization in that place. And one of the ways that came home to me as a child and then growing up into my teen years as an adult, we're going to these variety shows they have in Branson. That's what put Branson on the map. There are many of them family shows. When I say family, I mean multiple generations of the same family, or they own a theater, they sing and dance and do comedy, all these and that's what put Branson on the map. And so if you go to any of these shows, which are still in existence today, there was a time, back in the 80s where they had even more of them than they do now. But if you were to go today, you would find dozens of these shows lining what they call the Branson Strip. Think Las Vegas without the casinos. Just this long line of theaters going down the street, and all of these theaters, shows in the evenings, performers, comedy, singing, all the things. All of these shows, regardless of what genre of music you're talking about, they have something in common, and that is they all end the same way. The second to last song, and I've been going again since I was 6-7 years old. There's never been an exception to this. And I'm not exaggerating. I've probably been to hundreds of these shows in my lifetime. And without exception, they all end the same way. The second to last song is a religious song. This is a religious crowd, God and country. Amazing Grace, How Great Thou Art, something deeply moving. And without exception, the crowd is very appreciative of those songs. It's a religious crowd. Probably 95% of this crowd, these are Christian people that have come, and they are very appreciative of that song. So they sit and they clap, and it's a reverent moment. The last song, without exception, every show I've ever been to is a patriotic song. God Bless the USA, the Star-Spangled Banner, something else, and deeply moving. And I noticed from the time I was a child into my teen years and now as an adult, the same thing happens every time at that moment. And what happens when they begin singing the patriotic song? Everybody stands.
They all stand.
And I remember
over their heart.
Right. I remember I was probably 15 or 16 years old when it first began to dawn on me.
They take their hats off too, Will.
They do. They take their hats off. It hands over the heart. You're right. And it is I will use this word, it is a sacred moment. And I remember 15, 16 years old beginning to ask the question for the first time, why are they standing for the last song, but not the second to last song? What's going on here? And that was I didn't know I was thinking about civil religion then, but that was the first moment I began to think about civil religion and began to ask the question, what is happening here that I don't understand? I knew my parents were deeply religious people. My grandparents who were there, deeply religious people. None of them were standing during the second to last song. They all stood in the last song, and the room was filled with people. And every time I've gone back, it's the same thing. And I think that ritual, that moment, is very telling. And I think it signals something about our society. And again, I think if you were to go into First Baptist Church, downtown Dallas on a Sunday morning and ask somebody, do you care more about God or your country? They're going to say God every time. But the way that we live and the habits that we follow and the rituals that we perform, I'm not sure those are saying the same thing. And I think we really see that in our own time, practically speaking.
Yeah. I mean, like, how did we even get to this point, Wes? I mean, when, you turn on the TV, you see, America 250, rededicate 250, America praise. Mm-hmm. You see, prayers at, the January 6th, on the dais, and you're just like, what in the world is happening? Like, help us understand, like, how did we get to this point where Christians, primarily like Republican or conservative Christians, are married are married at the hip to essentially nationalism. Like, help us understand that.
Yeah, I think that we see it it's more evident in moments like the one in which we're living, where there's incredible polarization. I would suggest that we've probably always, to a great degree, as American people, been motivated by our civil religion. In fact, when Robert Bellah wrote about it in 1960, it wasn't all bad. He wasn't necessarily saying this is a horrible thing. He was saying, isn't this great that we have this thing that brings us together? If religion's not going to do it, at least this does. And that's great. We had this coherence in our society. Now, he did, especially later on in his writings, talk about some serious implications of that. So, for example, when we moved into the era of the Vietnam War, he began to talk about how civil religion changed that discussion, and not for the better. So there are some implications. But there are some ways in which civil religion provides a function that brings Americans together. And that could be, in some ways, could be construed as a healthy thing. But when we're living in a moment like we're living in now, where there's such deep polarization, I think it becomes more evident how aligned we are. And I'll say it this way in our time, how aligned we are to our political platforms, which is an extension of our love for our country and our allegiance to our country. It's easy to tell when I disagree with my brother or sister in Christ in politics, and that becomes a religious discussion. And we've seen this right around family dinner tables where people can't practice Thanksgiving with each other anymore. People have to leave churches because they can't worship with people who don't think like them anymore. And I think that deep polarization it makes it worse because we don't all agree on these things. And so when we have discussions of just about anything, it becomes a polarized political discussion. And because we are so aligned with our political values and our national values, to us, this becomes religious confrontation. And we're seeing that in our own time. I think there are a lot of reasons for it. This isn't the only reason, but I think chief among them, I think, has to be named the 24-hour news cycle. I think that's a scourge on our society. I think it's awful because, I'll just take the two big ones, whether you're talking about CNN or Fox News, both of these are entertainment industries, and they're playing for votes, and they're saying the most outrageous things, and they know that as human people, we are motivated by fear, and our politicians know that we are motivated by fear. And so they're feeding that monster every time we turn on the television. And I think that only incites our polarization. But as it incites our polarization, we become more and more aware of the ways in which we disagree with one another and how aligned we are with our specific political point of view. And I think that can be a very dangerous thing. As we can see, it is a very dangerous thing.
Yeah. Yes. I was gonna say something real fast. I saw a meme recently that said, I'm probably gonna butcher it, but it was along the lines of, like, how do you know if your faith has gotten too political? And the conclusion was, if your God hates all the same people that you do. That's
right. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. We live in an echo chamber.
Yes.
We only hear from voices that think like we do. And so, and I'm guilty of this as well. I found myself in moments over the last few years thinking about a different political side, thinking, how in the world could anybody think that? I don't know anybody that thinks that way. And that's because we are surrounded with people that think just like we do. The algorithms and social media are geared that way. We see the responses in the feeds and the chatter from people that think like we do. And that's all we hear. And I've always thought one of the best things that really faithful, healthy, mature Christian people could do, and I work on a Christian campus university, and I think one of the best things a Christian university could do is to provide really coherent, spiritually mature people, voices on both sides of the aisle to come have really informed conversations about difficult issues. One of the places I saw this in some degree was a couple of years ago. We had a conference here on ACU's campus, and we invited in Cornell West and it's Robert George, and they've done this for years. So you probably know what I'm talking about. Yeah, so there are not two people in America that think more unalike on politics than those two men, but they're tremendous friends. They actually, their families sometimes do holidays together. They've known each other for years. And what they have done is they have gone around the country for a number of years now, and they've modeled healthy disagreement. They've modeled healthy discussion. And they have that conversation in front of other people, many of them deeply committed Christian people. And I think we need more of that. We don't know how to disagree with one another in healthy ways. And because we don't see that modeled, I think our assumption oftentimes is that if you disagree with me, well, then you must be, a demon, or you're evil, or fill in the blank. We do not model, we don't provide space for people to disagree in healthy ways. And we need to be better about that. I think that's a path forward, something that we could really learn from.
If we imagine, I really like that. If we imagine like the person sitting in Branson, you've done a lot of thinking into this, right? So you're probably sitting there, and it's way different internally in you than it might be in like someone a couple rows away from you. Yeah. And let's just say they're there and it comes up to the last one, right? Second last song, they're touched by this. Then, Star Spangled Banner comes and they stand up. Mm-hmm. Do you think in their mind, and maybe this is already an easy answer, but I think it leads to the tension. Do you think in their mind they are being idolatrous? Or
no,
is it like, hey,
not.
So, okay, that makes sense. So then it's like, hey, then they're looking at this and they're thinking, well, God, I'm actually honoring God by honoring my country. I'm actually being a good Christian by being a good citizen. Like it's part of what God wants. I remember, never forget, in a discussion, Will was in it, a couple other guys, some of my friends, all black dudes, and I'm talking to them about being a patriot, like I'm patriotic, and I feel like this is my country. And all of them said the same thing. I love this country, but I never thought it was mine. I never thought this is for me. This is my ever, like, and I just sat there and I thought, oh my goodness. And I got hit by this sense of civil religion where I was feeling these things. When I'd hear the Star Spangled Banner, it was a religious experience for me. It was. I felt like I was touched, and I felt like I'm touched, and this is good because God wants me to be touched by this. He wants me to. This is a part of being a good Christian, is being a good patriot and citizen. And yet, though, we've been talking about the danger of this. And I would love for you to give to kind of the average listener who's kind of listening to this and are thinking, man, am I giving into idolatry? Maybe many of them probably don't care. They don't even think about idolatry. We have a broad mix that listen. But if someone's here and they're like, how do I know if I'm idolatrous? And we know we've been going around this subject, but I'd love to get really practical for someone. If they're the ones who stand up and did it willingly, and then they hear this and they're like, they get a hit by that. How do you explain and kind of help them? How would you guide and shepherd them through this experience?
Yes. So one of the reasons I wrote the book is I think to help people differentiate between those things. Again, I think we have people sitting in our pews that are so passionate, so emotional about these issues, but they don't know why. I believe, going back to our first question, church history, and I think this discussion of civil religion, it helps us understand why we are so passionate about these things. I think if you can begin to understand why it's happening to you, so lack of disestablishment of religion, this is what's connected us, this is why we're all those things. I think if you can begin to understand why it's happening, then we have a better chance of separating the two. Because I would say they need to be separated. I love my country. We just had 4th of July. I love shooting fireworks. I'm proud to be an American, all of those things. It is not my faith. And
yes,
when I sing the national anthem, I'm not, those are not sacred moments for me. Those are good moments. It unites me to the people around me. I'm excited and cheer for America in the Olympics, right? The World Cup. I was cheering for the United States. That's part of my identity. It's not sacred. And I think we must, as Christian people, separate those two. A few weeks ago, I was preaching on a text. I'm preaching for a church right now in the Metroplex. And so in Fort Worth, I preached a sermon. We're going through Exodus right now. And I was in that text where the Israelites, the Hebrew people, former slaves, sitting at the base of Mount Sinai. Moses is up on the mountain. He's gone for weeks at a time. They feel like he's gone. He's disappeared. They barely know this guy anyway. And so they build this golden calf. And I think many of us have read that story for years and years and years, and we think this is an example of idolatry. This is idol worship. And I would say, not exactly. Actually, what they were doing is they didn't believe they were worshiping another god. They created a golden calf to worship it in the name of Yahweh.
Yahweh, yes.
So we can't see Yahweh, so we're going to make this image, and for us, this will be a representation of Yahweh. So we'll worship the golden calf in the name of Yahweh. That's a problem. It was a problem in Exodus, and it's a problem now. So the degree to which when any of us has a moment where we're standing for the national anthem or hand of our heart or a deeply emotional moment with the flag is raised or whatever else, if we perceive that as a sacred moment, as a moment that is akin to or on the same plane of our worship of God or aligned in any way, connected, I think that's a problem. I think we're moving into idolatry. That doesn't mean that someone cannot be patriotic. That doesn't mean someone cannot love their country. That doesn't mean you can't wear red, white, and blue and pop fireworks. But it does mean that those rituals, those moments, that allegiance cannot rival or be on any kind of the same plane as our devotion to God. And I think we are living in a time where it's evident that that is the case for many of us. And I think that's a problem.
Yeah, I agree. And I wonder, like, where do you put the sacrifice of a soldier who has given their life for their country, right? Because when I think of transcendence, I think, like, there's a time where I was proud to give my life for my country. Just like I want to maybe I give my life for Christ. And yet, where do you put those things?
I don't think those are on the same plane. I think I'm thankful for American soldiers. My grandfather was in World War II. I understand all of those things, and I'm thankful for that. That's not sacred. I mean, that is in no way, the same thing as Christ's sacrifice for humanity. And I cringe, honestly. I cringe when I hear somebody standing at the communion table and they draw that analogy on Veterans Day or any other day. It's not the same thing. We can be thankful for those things. That doesn't mean that those are sacred moments or that is in any way aligned with or connected to our faith in God. Those are different things.
Yeah, like how do you even like detangle like those two? Because and then maybe secondly is like how do you even respond? And the reason I'm asking this question is because over the 4th of July weekend, my family and I, we went up to Indiana. That's where our in-laws are. We attended her dad's church. And the service at the church was very Independence Day-y focus. So lots of flags, lots of Star Spangled Banner singing, in addition to worship songs and whatnot. And so, and it's like, because of this podcast, it's almost like I've become uniquely attuned and sensitive to stuff like that. So I'm in the pews, and I've got my hat on. I'm just waiting for somebody to tell me to take it off, and I'm singing the Star Spangled Banner, and I'm like, man, if somebody had a picture right now, it's like they could really get me, and be like, look at Will in this nationalist church, or whatever. I mean, it's my father-in-law. So, anyways, the service went off without a veil. I didn't end up storming any capitals afterward, and it was fairly benign. But a part of me was like, what do I do with that? Part of me is like, don't do anything with it. It's an older church. I was probably the youngest person in the entire place. I was definitely the darkest. And I was just like, it's not really that big of a deal. But that church and all the churches in America have gotten to that place in some form or fashion, and it's going to take a while to sort of detangle it. So, what hope, or is there any hope in us detangling it?
Yeah, I would say, to push back, I think it is a big deal. I think it's a huge deal. But I think it's become so commonplace, it's easier for us to just kind of kick the can down the road and say, well, it's too big of a problem that we can't really address it. I think we must address it. I think there are serious implications of it. One of the implications of it is, you think of it this way, the degree to which we connect America to our faith in alignment with God and our devotion to God, that makes it much easier for us to do things like saying America is we're God's chosen people, and God loves Americans more than God loves people from Brazil or Iran or Iraq or Russia. The fact is, we are all part of God's creation. And I think the degree to which we connect our love for our country and our religion, that's one of the places, I think, practically speaking, we can see where we enter a danger zone really quick. The others is, I think, what I've already mentioned. I think you don't have to look very far in Scripture to see how serious God was about idolatry and about worshiping anything. When anything takes, the allegiance that should be reserved for God and devotion that should be reserved for God, worship that should be reserved for God, that's always been a problem. But I think it has become so commonplace, at least where I live. I've lived most of my life in the American South, where the church that you described, I mean, you can find that church on every corner of every town that I've ever lived in. This is the water we drink and the air we breathe. But because it's so commonplace, I think that we just become desensitized to it and think, well, it's not a big deal. Man, I think it is. I think it is a big deal. And I think the extent to which we continue to go down that road and continue to practice our faith that way and continue to train the next generation to practice their faith that way, I think we're digging a hole deeper and deeper and deeper. And I think it's a real serious concern. I really do.
Yeah, I understand. I definitely understand the concern. And I think for me, like, when I start to process through the logic of it, like, for instance, if I'm like, well, if God needs me to be a patriot in order to be a good Christian, what happens when the government that I'm supposed to be a patriot to and loyal to is disloyal to God?
Right.
I mean, that's a very clear, like, what happens when they clash? What happens when there's a clash of loyalties and demands? Who wins? And unfortunately, I think the imminent normally wins. The one that the thing that we feel is present all around us. Right. We say God is, but that's why people who have actually chosen to follow God over the surrounding cultures and history many times have made history because it's so unusual that someone would swim against the stream of their culture. And I think, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'll say the clearest example of that. I remember years ago when I was in seminary, our qualifying exams at the very end of that process, we had oral exams, and they were built around case studies. And so our last semester, we had a case study that centered on a biblical text, some sort of thing we had to work out through the whole semester. There was something centered on a ministry situation, and there was something historical theological. And so the case that we had to work out in the historical theology piece, the semester that I graduated from seminary, centered on the German Christians in the mid-20th century. And so here were a group of Christians that, and as crazy as it seems to us living now and knowing all the things that we know because history has been written, there were Christians living in Germany in the 1930s and 1940s that believed by following Hitler, they were expressing their Christian faith.
Absolutely.
They were honoring the leader as Romans told them to do.
Absolutely.
They were doing the things that they could not separate those two things.
It was ultimately their responsibility. It was the leader. They just did what they were told.
They were doing what they were told.
They're supposed to do, and the leader. Yep.
Right. But here's another example where, to use that word, kind of a nationalism was so enmeshed and so aligned with faith that they couldn't disconnect the two. And I think there's a clear example. It's an extreme example, but there's a clear example of the implications of what could happen when we cannot separate those two. Because what I want to say is, our love for our country and our love for God, those are two different things. You can love both. They're not the same thing. And we have to pull them apart. Because if we don't pull them apart, things like 1930s, 1940s Germany can happen. And it's not the first time it's happened in history. You know, I mean, happens again and again. And I think it's naive to think that we are immune from following the footsteps of people who've lived before us.
We are not immune. We are not immune at all. And I think that, like, looking at I truly believe they're not the first ones, but the Trump administration is attached on to Christianity, even though Trump is not a Christian as far as anything I've seen by personal confession or behavior. He's not an Christian. And yet they've attached on to this because they see the political power of it. And it's like a part of what happens, I think, again, when we say, because I've been pushing back on you, and the reason I've been doing that because I want people to hear the reasons, because it's not necessarily obvious all the time for us. Because hey, if we sing the Star Spangled Banner in church, who cares? I feel good, it's nice, we're patriotic, and then we're done. And you're saying no, that's not. So people need to understand why. Well, it's because one thing is when we make being American a good Christian, then you make American culture Christian culture, and so anything from another culture that isn't fitting into American culture makes it sinful, even though it may have nothing to do with what the Bible prohibits or allows.
Yeah. It makes it much easier to marginalize anyone who is other than us.
Absolutely.
And we see that throughout history. And honestly, we see it in our own time. And I think that's dangerous.
Yeah. We pretend in the name of Christianity. Absolutely.
I want to say one thing, because I'm reading this one book right now called Mistakes Were Made, but not by me. By Carol Tavris and Elliot something, I can't remember, but one of the things that they talk about in there, it's all about cognitive dissonance and about like strategies, you know, of why people try to reduce dissonance because it makes them feel icky, you know, and with Christians, a lot of the times when they are attacking other people and putting them down, it's really just a tack to justify their actions towards this group. So like if I call a group like an idiot, then it's like I'm not
treat them like they're dumb.
Yeah. I'm not going to feel bad when I treat them like they're dumb, even if they're not dumb, you know? So it's sort of like this dissonance like mechanism that we use that's basically just like a self-licking ice cream cone. It just keeps going, you know, and keep going.
Yeah, we have to justify our actions. I mean, thinking about cognitive dissonance, as you mentioned earlier in the podcast, most of my academic writing throughout my academic career has centered on race relationships in America. And so one of the things I've studied a lot is within the slave trade. And so Christian people were not only complicit in the slave trade, they were the architects of the slave trade. And what happened in that time is, obviously there are parts of the slave system that are dissonant with the ethics of Jesus.
Yes.
And so one of the things that's been written about quite a bit over the last few generations is this example of cognitive dissonance. At some point, people have to either, if they're doing something that is in conflict with their belief system, over time, they have to either change what they're doing or change their belief system.
Exactly.
You just cannot continue to go down the path of doing something that's at odds with your belief system for an extended period of time. And so I've told people this illustration before as a minister. I've been in my office. People have come in before on more than one occasion. I've had two men, actually, they're both men, that came and sat in my office and they said, I'm having an affair, but God wants me to do this. You know, I'm actually a better Christian now that I'm out of this abusive, toxic relationship. And now I'm a better Christian. God has put this other individual in my path. And now that we are together, my spiritual life is going to be better, all the things. And this is God's will. That's ludicrous. And we all know that's ludicrous. But I think that's an example of cognitive dissonance. Here's an individual that was doing something that was against his belief system. Yes. And he had to either change his behavior or change his belief system. And he changed his belief system. And I think we did that with slavery. So we're in the midst of a slave trade. And over time, we had to either quit the slave trade, which was incredibly economically beneficial for a lot of people, or we had to find a way to justify it. So we did that in all sorts of ways. One of the most toxic ways that white Euro-Americans did that is the idea that God put white people on the African continent to spread Christianity. If not for the slave trade, right, these African people would not have known Christianity, which with a complete disregard that Christianity was in Africa long before it was in Europe or North America. But it was that idea that we had to justify it in some way, this cognitive dissonance that you're expressing. And I think we see that all over the place.
We absolutely see it all over the place. And Wes, man, it's been such a pleasure to have this conversation with you. Unfortunately, it's drawing to an end. We're coming up on our time, but I would love to hear from you. Like, you wrote the book. You obviously want people to read it. You want them to understand it. But if you were to just put it into one, maybe like a few sentences here, what do you want? What are your hopes for this book, and what do you want people to grab onto when they're picking this up?
Yeah, going back to what I said at the very beginning, I want this book to be incredibly relevant. I want it to be useful. This has been an attempt to take an academic discipline that has been written about for over half a century, but it's only been studied in academic circles, kind of the ivory tower, and it really has not made its way fully into congregational life. And so I'm hopeful that this discussion can begin to permeate within the pews, within the congregations, because I'm not sure there is a more timely discussion. I think it's so important. I think this issue left unaddressed is crippling the witness of the church. I think it's derailing us. It's leading us into the arena of idolatry, and so I want people to read it. I think there are all sorts of people out there that are deeply passionate about this. They're polarized from their family members and their neighbors and their fellow congregates and other Christians, and they don't know why that they are so emotional and so passionate about this. This book is an attempt to help them understand why. There's a reason why. There's a logical, sociological, historical reason why we think of our country the way that we do. And I think this book can help us understand that. And I think having that knowledge can allow us to get to a place where we can begin to untangle our love for our country and our allegiance to God. And when we do that, I think when we have proper perspective, we can have much healthier conversations with what's happening in our world and in our country right now.
I really love it. And I feel compelled, honestly, to ask just this other one. Like, we know the book is coming out in October. So the question is, it's October. Someone's either a layperson at church or their leader. What are their next steps? How do you do this in a church? Like a pastor, I'm imagining getting up there and doing what you did. We're not doing anything on Veterans Day, or we're not doing anything patriotic ever again from this point forward. Maybe that's the approach. Maybe it isn't. What would you say? How would you recommend someone, maybe two people, pastor then layperson?
Sure.
How would you recommend next steps just quickly for them?
I would say for pastors, and I have a deep heart for this. I'm a pastor, and I think in terms of like, how do I communicate this to the church? How does this make a difference in the life of an average Christian? I think there are ways to take some of the things that are in this book and other resources as well. I think the best setting is probably like a Bible class, a place where you can go slowly, where you can have conversation and answer questions and have really healthy discussions. I think that's a great venue to do something like this. Just to, again, I think it disarms the conversation to have the knowledge of why we are the way we are. So now that we know, how can we disentangle these two things, and how can we become healthier Christians and provide a greater witness to the world? I would encourage pastors to do that. Find ways to communicate some of these concepts to their churches in smaller groups, Bible classes. I think that's, in terms of strategy, I think that's a good strategy. For people in the pew, get your hands on some of these resources. I'm biased. I'll tell you to read this book. There are other books as well. Just try to understand this better. And I would say this as well. Don't demonize people that think differently than you do. And I think one healthy thing to do is try to put yourself in the proximity of people with whom you disagree, because we're not very good at doing that right now. With our social media, with our congregations, with our friend groups, we gravitate toward people that think just like we do. And I think now is a moment where we need to hear coherent, thoughtful perspectives with people that we disagree with. I think we need that desperately right now.
Yes, I absolutely agree. How can people connect with you? When does the book come out? How can they get it? Where do you recommend? Kind of help people step.
Sure, yeah. I think the release date's October 6th, October 5th or 6th, somewhere around in there. We're a couple months away. I write a regular Substack article. I'd love for people, and I write on these kinds of topics, try to do that about once a week. And so you can find me online there, Instagram, as well as a good place to connect with me. I'm happy. I respond really well. If people want to write a comment or send me a message, happy to get back with you and get in dialogue with you. I love to help in any way that I can.
Well, thank you so much, Wes. It's been an unbelievable conversation. Super delightful for me. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've enjoyed it.
Absolutely. And to our viewers and our listeners, guys, like, subscribe. I mean, you've been here this long, so make sure you're doing that. Share with someone who can listen to this and benefit from it. We really try to get good conversations, good material out that's thought-provoking and practical and helpful and challenging. So please help us out with that. And until next time, guys, keep your conversations not right or left, but up. We'll see you then.